Morgan gained financial control over many of the companies he had consolidated. His far-reaching control coined a new term, remorganization. Morgan was... By 1893, J. Pierpont Morgan was one of the most powerful men in America. But life wasn't all business for Morgan. He frequently traveled to Europe, voraciously collecting rare books and great art.
Shortly after his father's death in 1890, he began to collect on a massive scale. And within a very short time, he became, quite simply, the greatest art collector of modern times.
He had only one steadfast rule. If he wanted it, he bought it. He was intent on owning the world's greatest art. His efforts invited comparisons to Napoleon, a parallel to Morgan's childhood idol that would have thrilled him.
He once wrote a letter to his sister saying, I'm done with the Greek antiquities, I am now at the Egyptians. He was like a freight train going from one period of art history to another.
He was like a freight train in business as well. He was now 58 years old, and his personal share in his company was worth more than $4 million. But Morgan was still looking to expand his influence. The opportunity almost brought disaster. As a result of the Depression of 1893, the federal government's gold reserves had dropped to an alarmingly low level. Without gold, the government's guarantee to pay its debts was meaningless. Foreign banks, heavily invested with American assets, became alarmed and began withdrawing even more gold. By 1894, the situation was so grim that it looked as though the United States government would go broke. Morgan moved fast. He devised a plan in which American and European bankers would invest gold directly in the government, saving it from collapse. The offer of relief was quickly taken to the President of the United States, Grover Cleveland. Morgan played solitaire in his library as he awaited the President's response. When the answer finally came, it was a disappointment. The President had rejected Morgan's plan. Instead, he backed a plan to raise the money by selling bonds directly to the public. Even if President Cleveland had agreed with Morgan, his hands were tied. Only Congress could borrow money for the United States, and many congressmen were determined to keep Wall Street power brokers like Morgan from controlling the Treasury's coffers. But Morgan knew that the government didn't have time to sell bonds to the public. He was certain that his plan was the nation's only hope. Determined to get his way, Morgan sped to Washington, but was told that the President would not see him. Morgan's reply was swift and gruff. I have come down to Washington to see the President, and I'm going to stay here until I see him.
I think Pierpont Morgan certainly felt that he was the equal of the President of the United States.
The next morning, word came from the White House that Morgan would be received. During the meeting with the President and other cabinet members, the United States Treasurer was given an urgent message. Turning to the group, he announced that only $9 million in gold was left in the Treasury. Morgan seized that opportunity. He pointed out that he knew of a $10 million draft about to be presented against the Treasury. If that $10 million draft is presented, you can't meet it, declared Morgan. It will be all over by 3 o'clock. President Cleveland thought it over. What suggestions do you have to make, Mr. Morgan? Morgan had a plan. He had discovered an outdated statute from the Civil War. It allowed the Treasury to buy gold. No longer used, but still in effect, it was the loophole needed to circumvent Congress and allow the Treasury to implement Morgan's plan. President Cleveland agreed. Within days, the flow of gold began to run back into the Treasury, completely halting the financial crisis. Many hailed Morgan as a hero, praising his patriotism and selflessness. Others accused him of manipulating the government and collecting a profit. But But this great master of men and things had another side. Morgan was known for enormous appetites.
He consumed enormous quantities of port, sherry, and wine with dinner. He had breakfasts so large they could have killed a horse.
His appetites extended to other areas as well. He was often seen in the company of women other than his wife, and was known to throw extravagant parties on the Corsair. It was said that he lavished his women with gifts of diamonds, furs, and money. His name was connected romantically with theater stars Maxine Elliott and Lillian Russell.
He was a very strong believer in the double standard, even as he became involved with other women. Pierpont once made a very telling comment that there are always two reasons why a man does something, a good reason and the real reason. And he was always very respectful of Fanny. He was very discreet about the various escapades that he went through.
Morgan's passionate nature extended to his business enterprises. In 1901, he undertook the largest business transaction in modern history, the purchase of Carnegie Steel. Carnegie Steel was the crown jewel in the Morgan Empire. When asked to name his price, Andrew Carnegie jotted down a figure on the back of an envelope. Morgan looked at the price, $493 million, and immediately said, "I accept." With Carnegie Steel under his belt, Morgan formed the United States Steel Corporation in March of 1901. Its stock was valued at $1,400 million. Morgan had created the world's first billion-dollar corporation. But his enormous power now brought public scrutiny.
After his creation of U.S. Steel, he controlled somewhere between 60 and 70% of the American steel industry. He controlled a third of American railways at a time when railway stocks comprised 60% of all the stocks on the New York Stock Exchange. So the American public could be forgiven for imagining that Mr. J. Pierpont Morgan owned the United States.
Morgan had reached the pinnacle of his power, and it looked as though nothing could stop him. Right after the creation of U.S. Steel, Morgan formed another massive company, merging two of the nation's largest railroads. It was called Northern Securities. To Morgan, the company would provide stability among the railroads, positively influencing the American economy. To others, it was a monopoly that gave J. Pierpont Morgan a carte blanche to amass more wealth and power. With his unprecedented success on Wall Street, Morgan thought that his power and control could easily be extended to Washington politics. His influence helped William McKinley, a friend to big business, become President of the United States. But on September 6, 1901, McKinley was cut down by an assassin's bullet and died 8 days later. With McKinley gone from the White House and public opinion turning against big business, Morgan soon confronted a man whose power equaled his own. New York in 1901 was buzzing with power, money, and influence. And in the center of it all was the most powerful man in the nation, J. Pierpont Morgan.
He had a very powerful presence. Descriptions of him walking up and down Wall Street, pushing people out of the way. But the fact is, he didn't have to push people out of the way. They saw him coming and they leapt out of the way.
And he needed all his power and influence as events forced Morgan into the toughest fight of his life. Theodore Roosevelt became president after McKinley's assassination and immediately set out to rethink government's support of big business.
He was an unknown entity, but to the extent that people in New York knew his record, they also knew that he was something of a loose cannon who had gone on record as criticizing businessmen.
4 months after Roosevelt became president, Morgan found out firsthand where that cannon was pointing. The Attorney General of the United States, Philander C. Knox, set out to prosecute Morgan's Northern Securities Company for breach of the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. Roosevelt was determined to break up the trusts and return power to the little guy, and he would use Morgan to set the example.